We are told it is our noblest instinct, a sacred virtue, the very bedrock of a moral society. From childhood, we are taught to cultivate it, to practice it, to feel it. It is the ability to walk a mile in another person's shoes, to feel their pain as if it were our own. This is empathy. And in our modern world, we have elevated it to the status of a panacea. We believe it is the solution to everything from political division to personal conflict. We are told that if we could only feel what others feel, the world would heal. Empathy, we believe, is the purest expression of care. It is a word that carries an almost unimpeachable moral weight. To accuse someone of lacking empathy is to deliver a damning verdict on their character. But what if this belief, as beautiful and intuitive as it sounds, is dangerously incomplete? What if our relentless pursuit of empathy is not always a force for good? What if, in our attempt to feel with others, we are inadvertently falling into a devastating psychological trap, one that leads not to connection, but to paralysis, burnout, and ultimately, an inability to help at all? What if the most compassionate thing you could do for another person, and for yourself, is to learn how to stop feeling their pain? Today, we journey into the heart of one of our most cherished emotions to uncover its hidden dark side. We will explore the critical, and often overlooked, difference between feeling with someone and caring for them. This is the story of the empathy trap, and the powerful antidote that can save you from it, while making you a far more effective force for good in the world. To begin our journey, we must be precise. The word empathy is often used as a loose, catch-all term for being a kind, caring person. But in the fields of psychology and neuroscience, the term has a much more specific meaning. In reality, what we call empathy is a multifaceted experience, composed of at least two distinct components. The first is cognitive empathy. This is the capacity for perspective taking. It is an intellectual, almost strategic, ability to understand what another person is thinking and to comprehend their emotional state without necessarily feeling it yourself. A great negotiator possesses cognitive empathy. They can understand their opponent's desires and fears, allowing them to anticipate their moves. A good therapist uses cognitive empathy to understand a client's worldview. It is the ability to say, with genuine insight, "I understand." But the empathy that our culture truly glorifies is the second kind, effective empathy, also known as emotional empathy. This is not about understanding. It is about feeling. It is the visceral, gut-level, emotional resonance you experience when you see someone else in a powerful emotional state. It is when their sorrow floods your own nervous system, their anxiety knots your own stomach, their joy creates a warmth in your own chest. This is the empathy that makes us wince when a character in a film twists their ankle, or tear up when we watch a surprise family reunion. Our brains are equipped with what neuroscientists call a mirror neuron system. These remarkable cells fire not only when we perform an action, but also when we observe someone else performing that action. Effective empathy is the emotional equivalent of this mirroring. You are, quite literally, feeling a shadow, a facsimile of their internal state. For decades, the prevailing assumption in popular psychology was that this emotional contagion is the primary and most noble motivator for helping others. The logic seems impeccable. If I feel your pain, I will be motivated to stop it. But a growing and increasingly robust body of research is revealing a startling and counterintuitive truth. An overdose of effective empathy often does the very opposite. It doesn't lead to effective action. It leads to a state known as empathic distress. Imagine a close friend comes to you, their world shattered by a sudden, painful breakup. They are crying, lost, and consumed by grief. As they share their story, you engage your effective empathy. You don't just listen, you feel it. You feel the crushing weight of their sadness, the sharp sting of their rejection, the terrifying void of their fear of being alone. Inside your brain, a fascinating and terrible process is unfolding. Neuroimaging studies show that the same neural networks that activate when you experience physical or emotional pain yourself, specifically the anterior insular and the anterior cingulate cortex, are now lighting up in sympathy. Your brain is not just imagining their pain, it is creating its own parallel pain experience. For a moment, this feels like the deepest form of connection. You are truly with them in their suffering. But what happens if you remain in this state? The feeling intensifies. It becomes overwhelming, aversive. You are now carrying not one, but two burdens of sorrow, theirs and your own mirrored, vicarious version of it. Your own physiological stress response kicks in. Your cortisol levels rise. Your heart rate increases. You are now, officially, in a state of distress. And at this critical juncture, your primary motivation subtly, unconsciously shifts. It moves from how can I best support my friend in their suffering, to a far more primitive and self-focused question. How can I make this terrible feeling inside me go away? This is the empathy trap. The very emotion we believed was for them has become a problem that is all about us. In this state of empathic distress, we are far more likely to engage in unhelpful behaviors. We might withdraw emotionally, shutting down because the feeling is too much to bear. We might lash out with frustration, saying something like, "You just need to get over it," not because we're cruel, but because their persistent sadness is causing us persistent pain. Or we might offer simplistic, hollow platitudes, everything happens for a reason, not to soothe them, but to end the conversation and, by extension, our own discomfort. The psychologist Paul Bloom, in his provocative and essential book Against Empathy, argues this point with forceful clarity. He writes, from a moral standpoint, we are better off without it. This sounds heretical, but his argument is grounded in evidence. He contends that effective empathy is a terrible moral guide. It is biased. We feel it more for people who look like us, who are in our in-group. It is narrow. We feel more for a single, identifiable victim, the child stuck in the well, than we do for thousands of nameless, statistical victims of a famine or a faraway war. And it is short-sighted. It can drive us to make decisions that feel good in the moment but have disastrous long-term consequences. The consequences of this trap are not theoretical. They are devastatingly real, and they are everywhere. It's the nurse in the oncology ward who, after feeling the pain of hundreds of patients day after day, burns out, becomes cynical, and leaves the profession she once loved. It's the social activist who becomes so paralyzed by the sheer scale of the world's suffering that they fall into a deep, inactive depression. It's the parent who becomes so enmeshed in their child's social anxiety that they amplify it, trying to solve every problem for them, rather than teaching them resilience. They all fell into the same trap. They believed the goal was to feel the pain. But what if the goal is something else entirely? What if there is another way to care, a way that is more sustainable, more effective, and ultimately more loving? For centuries, Buddhist philosophy has explored the inner workings of the mind with a psychological rigor and nuance that modern science is only now beginning to appreciate. And in this rich tradition, a sharp distinction is made between the state of vicarious suffering and a far more powerful and sustainable state of mind. This state is known as Karan, a Sanskrit word we translate as compassion. At first glance, empathy and compassion seem like synonyms, interchangeable words for a kind heart. But neurologically and experientially, they are worlds apart. This is not just philosophical semantics. It is a critical distinction for anyone who wishes to care for others without destroying themselves. If empathy is feeling with someone, compassion is caring for someone. Compassion still involves the cognitive understanding of another's pain, but it is not defined by emotional contagion. Instead, it is characterized by a feeling of warmth, of kindness, and, crucially, a strong motivation to help alleviate that suffering. It is a state of loving concern, not shared misery. The neuroscientist Tania Singer and her team at the Max Planck Institute in Germany conducted landmark studies that beautifully and scientifically illustrate this profound difference. They assembled groups of participants and put them through different types of mental training. The first group was put through empathy training. They were taught to deeply resonate with the suffering of others, to practice feeling the pain they observed. When these participants were then placed in an fMRI scanner and shown videos of people in pain, their brains reacted exactly as predicted. The pain matrix, the anterior insula and anterior singular cortex, lit up like a Christmas tree. They reported feeling distressed, overwhelmed, and negative. They were trapped in empathy. The second group, however, was trained in compassion, specifically through a practice called love-and-kindness meditation. They were not instructed to feel the pain of others. Instead, they were taught to extend feelings of warmth, care, and a sincere wish for the suffering of all beings to end. When this compassion-trained group was shown the very same videos, their brains lit up in a completely different and remarkable way. The pain centers remained quiet. Instead, a completely different set of neural circuits became active, networks associated with love, reward, and affiliation, areas like the medial orbitofrontal cortex and the ventral striatum. These are the very same circuits that light up when a mother feels a deep, unconditional love for her child, or when we experience moments of profound joy and connection. The subjective experience of this group was the polar opposite of the empathy group. They did not report feeling distressed or overwhelmed. Instead, they reported feeling a warm, expansive, positive, and energizing feeling of care. They were not paralyzed. They were motivated. This is a revolutionary finding, with staggering implications for how we live and care for one another. It suggests that when we encounter suffering, we are standing at a fork in a neurological road. We can turn down the well-trodden path of empathy, a path that inevitably leads to the swamp of shared pain and eventual burnout. Or we can consciously choose to walk the path of compassion, a path that leads to a resilient, motivated, and energized state of readiness to help. The Buddhist monk and scientist Matthew Ricard, who himself participated in many of these brain imaging studies, describes compassion as having a prosocial and courageous motivation. It creates a feeling of empowerment, a sense of resourcefulness. He uses a powerful analogy. Empathy is the feeling I feel your pain, and it can be overwhelming. Compassion is the feeling I want to help you, and it is empowering. This brings us to a concept that may sound, at first, like a cold contradiction in terms: compassionate detachment. This is not the cold, unfeeling detachment of a sociopath, which is rooted in an absence of care. It is the warm, grounded, and focused detachment of a surgeon. A great surgeon cares deeply about the well-being of their patient. That care is the entire motivation for their work. But they cannot afford to feel the patient's anxiety and physical pain in their own body while they are holding a scalpel. To do so would make their hands shake, their judgment cloud. They must maintain a clear, focused mind, grounded in a deep and unwavering care for the patient, in order to be effective. This is the state we must learn to cultivate in our own lives. It is the ability to look at suffering in our friend, in our family, or in the headlines, and not be drowned by it. It is the wisdom to know that we must stay on the shore, strong, clear-headed, and resourceful, so that we can skillfully throw a rope, rather than impulsively jumping into the turbulent water to drown alongside the very person we are trying to save. This is not just a beautiful theory or a fascinating scientific finding. It is a practical skill that can be trained, a mental muscle that can be strengthened. Shifting from the default, automatic reaction of the empathy trap to a more deliberate, compassionate mindset is an active in a cultivation. It involves recognizing the path you are on and consciously choosing the other. Here is how it can be done. Step 1. Develop interoceptive awareness. The first step in escaping any trap is to realize you are in it. This requires interoception, which is the technical term for your sense of the internal state of your own body. You must become a skilled observer of your own nervous system. Begin to pay close attention to the physical signatures of empathic distress. When you're listening to a difficult story or watching a tragic news report, what happens inside your body? Do you feel a tightening in your chest? A clenching in your stomach? Does your breathing become shallow? Do you feel a wave of exhaustion, a sense of dread, or a desperate, twitchy urge to get away? These are not just feelings, they are physiological data. They are the signals that your nervous system is mirroring pain and entering a state of distress. The simple, non-judgmental act of noticing this, of silently saying to yourself, "This is empathic distress. My pain centers are active right now," is a radical act. It creates a crucial space of awareness between the stimulus and your reaction. And in that space, you can make a new choice. Step 2. The loving-kindness pivot. This is the central, active technique for training compassion. It is derived from ancient Buddhist practices and is the very method validated by Tania Singer's modern neuroscientific studies. It is a simple, yet profoundly effective, act of redirecting your intention. When you notice the wave of empathic distress beginning to rise, instead of sinking into the feeling and allowing it to consume you, you consciously and deliberately pivot to a compassionate wish. You can do this silently, in the privacy of your own mind. As you are listening to a friend describe their pain, when you feel your own stomach clenching empathetic resonance, you can silently repeat a simple, gentle phrase directed at them. May you be free from this suffering. May you find peace. May you be well. Notice the shift. You are not trying to feel their pain. You are actively generating a feeling of warmth and a positive, benevolent intention for them. This simple shift in focus is the cognitive lever that moves the primary activity in your brain from the pain network to the care and affiliation network. You are not repressing or ignoring the emotion. You are actively transforming it from a debilitating state into a constructive one. Step 3. Focus on action, however small. Empathic distress is a passive, helpless, and self-focused state. Compassion is an active, motivated, and other-focused state. A powerful way to facilitate the shift from one to the other is to move your mental energy from feeling to doing. Ask yourself one of the most useful questions in any difficult situation. What is the most helpful thing I can do right now? The answer doesn't have to be monumental. Often, the most helpful thing is simply to continue listening deeply and attentively, offering the gift of your calm, grounded presence. Other times, it might be offering a glass of water, making a cup of tea, or giving a supportive hug. For more complex problems, it might be helping them research a therapist, brainstorming a list of possible next steps, or accompanying them to a difficult appointment. The action itself can be very small. The point is to break the feedback loop of shared misery and engage the forward momentum of helpfulness. This act of service, no matter how minor, breaks the paralysis of empathy and engages the prosocial, empowering motivation of compassion. Step 4. Establish resilient boundaries. Finally, A life of sustainable compassion requires the wisdom of boundaries. In our culture, we often think of boundaries as selfish, as cold walls we put up to keep people out. But in this context, boundaries are a profound form of self-care that is absolutely essential for the long-term care of others. A compassionate boundary might mean saying to a friend, "I care about you so much, and I can see you're in immense pain. I can be fully present and listen for the next 20 minutes, but then I will need to take a break for my own well-being." It might mean consciously limiting your intake of news media when you feel yourself becoming overwhelmed. It might mean recognizing, with humility, that you are not responsible for fixing another person's life, and that your role is to support, not to save. Boundaries are not a sign that you don't care. They are the sign that you care enough to want to be able to show up tomorrow, and the day after that, with your emotional and psychological resources intact. As the saying goes, you cannot pour from an empty cup. Resilient boundaries are what keep your cup full. The modern glorification of empathy, this unquestioning belief that feeling another's pain is the highest form of good, has led us astray. It has created a culture of well-intentioned but exhausted helpers, of caregivers on the brink of burnout, of people who care so deeply that they end up withdrawing from the world altogether. It has taught us that the pinnacle of caring is to suffer alongside the suffering. But the converging evidence from both ancient contemplative wisdom and modern neuroscience points to a more powerful, more sustainable, and ultimately more loving path. The goal is not to feel less. It is to love better. To consciously move from empathy to compassion is to mature emotionally. It is to understand that true, effective help comes not from a shared panic, but from a grounded, warm, and courageous heart. It is to recognize that our own well-being is not at odds with our ability to care for others. It is the very foundation of it. By escaping the empathy trap, we do not become colder, more distant, or less human. We become more effective, more resilient, and more available to the people and the world that desperately need us. We learn to hold the immense pain of others with a courageous and open heart, without letting it capsize our own ship. And in doing so, we become a steady, reliable light in the darkness, rather than just another flame, flickering violently in the same painful wind.